Hello and welcome to Module 12. This week we're moving on to an entirely different topic, and our topic this week is elder abuse. We're going to talk about a number of different issues, including which population we're talking about, how we refer to them, 6 specific types of elder abuse, 2 serious problems that are occurring in our elderly population, some theories, and some other information about elder abuse. This is not a very difficult topic to learn. It is difficult to talk about and to think about because it is very sad what happens to a lot of our senior citizens. But I think you'll find this module to be a little lighter in the workload. So when we talk about elders and senior citizens, what age of a person are we talking about? Well, as the textbook points out, there's no standard definition. You may have to be one age to collect the pension you worked so hard for at work. You may be a different age when you're eligible for Social Security. You may be yet another age to qualify for some other types of benefits based on your age. There's no standard definition in this country of what is an elder or a senior citizen. Generally, when we talk about an elder or a senior, we're referring to someone who's age 60 or older. And the most common term of mistreatment that we use is elder abuse. Occasionally you'll hear senior abuse, but the most common is elder abuse. Let's talk a little bit about generations of people and how old people in our country are right now. So if you look at the bottom of the screen, our earliest generation that's still living is those from our silent generation. They were born right before the Great Depression up until the time of the end of World War II. Those people, the members of the silent generation, are now 76 to 93 years old. So this is the oldest segment of our population. Well, then we got our baby boomers. The baby boomers were born in a huge population explosion that started right after World War II and went on until 1964. The baby boomers are now between 57 to 75 years old. And I know there's a common expression I hear every now and then where someone says to an older person, "Easy, boomer." Well, this is where it comes from. It's talking about the baby boomer generation. And when someone says it to me, I say, well, let me correct you there. I'm not a baby boomer. I'm a Gen Xer. Generation X came after the baby boomers. We were born between 1965 to 1980. And the Generation X is now age 41 up to 56. After Generation X came Generation Y, not surprisingly. These folks were born between 1981 up to 1996. They are currently between 25 and 40 years of age. And what's the most common term we hear that's used to describe Generation Y people? What's the most common term? Millennials. These are the folks we refer to as millennials, those born between 81 to 96 who are currently 25 to 40. After Gen Y, not surprisingly, we have Generation Z. These people were born between 1997 to 2010. They are now between 11 to 24 years old. And our youngest population is Generation Alpha. They were born 2011 up until they haven't decided. People who decide population cohorts, I don't think have decided when Generation Alpha is going to end, but these people are 11 years old and younger right now. So the baby boomers were called boomers for a reason. The birth rate in the United States exploded right after World War II ended, starting in 1946. And you can see on this graph, this shows the birth rate in the United States from 1940 to 2012. And the number of births between 1946 till mid-1960s was extraordinary. This was a record population explosion for United States history. Well, what does that mean for us now? It means that in the year 2000, the number of seniors those 60 to 65 and older in New York State was around 2.5 million people. That was in the year 2000. So our baby boomers were starting to age. In 2020, this year, we have over 3 million people in New York State who are senior citizens. And in 2030, we're going to have just over 4 million people in New York State who fall within the definition of senior citizens. So what does this matter? Well, it matters because our senior population is exploding, just like our population exploded when this generation was born. So now all the people born between 1946 and the mid 1960s, well, they're all getting older at the same time. And as you can see from the chart, the birth rate dropped dramatically after the baby boomer generation. So our population is now older than it ever has been. There's 6 types of elder abuse. That's how I quantify them. You can look in the textbook and they describe these same issues. They may name them different things, but it's all the same topic, same material. So this is how I've divided the 6 types of elder abuse: physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, substandard living conditions, and financial exploitation. These terms all sound pretty familiar, right? When we talked about domestic violence, when we talked about child abuse and neglect, we talked about these same exact things. The one that's really markedly different in elder abuse, of course, is financial exploitation. We don't see that much with children, but we do unfortunately see it an awful lot with our senior citizens. We're also going to talk about 2 serious problems with this our current senior population, which is alcoholism and drug addiction. So what is the extent of elder abuse? How big is the problem of elder abuse? How many senior citizens are subjected to at least one type of abuse in the US every single year? Let me give you a couple seconds. Just come up with a guess. How many senior citizens in this country suffer at least one type of abuse every year in the United States? 5 million. Now, of course, this is a rough figure because elder abuse, like child abuse and domestic violence, is frequently underreported. But using a number of different sources, it's a pretty strong estimate supported by the research that it's about 5 million senior citizens in the United States every year who are abused. And of course, that means an awful lot in New York State. In New York State every year, over 250,000 senior citizens, about 260,000, are subjected to at least one type of abuse every year. So these numbers are astronomical, which means the problem is really difficult to solve. This is an aerial view of the city of Buffalo, New York, which has about 260,000 residents. So if you think about a city the size of Buffalo and the thousands and thousands of homes and businesses within a city the size of Buffalo, imagine every single one of these people being an abused senior citizen. Think about just the scope of that problem, and that's just New York State. Imagine if I gave you this photograph and said, everybody who lives in any one of the buildings and anyone who works in any one of these buildings is an abused senior citizen. And I need you to figure this out, and I need you to reduce the incidence of senior abuse. You can just imagine how overwhelming that would be. And 260,000 is just the number for New York State. So let's look at the different types of abuse, and we're going to go through this pretty quickly because this is going to sound very familiar to you. Physical abuse. Perpetrators of physical abuse can be both family members and paid caregivers. This is where things get a little different between domestic violence, child abuse, and elder abuse. So with elder abuse, we're also talking about people who are paid to take care of our elders. They could be home health aides, nurses, um, licensed practical nurses, aides, orderlies, anyone who works in a nursing home or a rehabilitation center, any type of facility that cares for seniors. And of course, it could also, remember, mean those who provide in-home care for seniors. So perpetrators of elder abuse in the physical sense can be family members or paid caregivers. Examples of physical abuse, of course, could include pushing, hitting, slapping, pinching, shaking, any type of physical contact that could cause injury to an elderly person. And of course, elderly people, much like children, are much more vulnerable to physical abuse and have a much harder and longer time recovering from physical injuries. Emotional or psychological abuse, again, the perpetrators can be family members and also paid caregivers. Examples of emotional or psychological abuse include threats, intimidation, harassment, verbal abuse, humiliation, screaming at, and gaslighting. You may remember the term gaslighting when we talked about domestic abuse. Gaslighting is a way of manipulating events to make someone feel like they're crazy. So no matter how sure someone is that something happened the way they know it did, someone else tries to make them feel like it couldn't have possibly happened that way. So, for example, if a senior citizen says, I've been keeping very careful track of my checkbook and I know I had $1,500 in my checking account and I've kept track of every single expenditure, well, somebody who's stealing money from them is going to go, you never had $1,500. You don't know what you're doing. You don't understand finances. You're crazy. You can't keep track of anything. And they make the elder person feel like, geez, maybe I am crazy. Maybe I did make a mistake. When in fact, what's happening is that person's stealing money from them. That's gaslighting, making somebody feel like they're crazy when they're really not. Sexual abuse. People are often surprised to hear about the incidents of sexual abuse that senior citizens have to suffer, both from family members and paid caregivers. This includes all types of sexual abuse that we're familiar with our study of domestic violence and of child abuse. It could include rape, sexual assault, unwanted touching. It can also include forced nakedness or humiliated nakedness, where someone feels too inconvenient by having to dress and undress an elderly person. So they're just like, forget it. You can just stay naked all the time, and make them be exposed to other people in a very demeaning fashion. Neglect. Again, perpetrators can be family members or paid caregivers. Examples of neglect with senior citizens include malnutrition, no medical treatment. No medical treatment could also include treatment for mental health and substance abuse. Abandonment. This is a big issue with senior citizens. Family members just abandoning their elderly relatives, their parents, their grandparents, so they have no care and they're literally left alone to fend for themselves. Abandonment can also apply to facilities. So, for example, in a nursing home, an elderly person waking up at 6 in the morning and no one talks to them or cares for them or feeds them all day long, or maybe only once in an entire 24-hour period. Mental health needs being unmet. Our senior citizens suffer from all the problems all the rest of us do at every ages: substance abuse, depression, anxiety, all those sorts of issues. Lack of hygiene support. It's often physically impossible for an elder to wash and bathe themselves, to comb their hair, to keep themselves clean, to do laundry so they can have freshly clean clothes on, to have their bed clean, to have their sheets washed. Those sorts of tasks can become incredibly difficult for seniors. And someone who's responsible for caring them, who just doesn't bother with all of that, is neglecting that senior. An unsafe shelter, of course, is also part of neglect, and we'll talk about substandard living conditions. Substandard living conditions. Again, I'm going to keep hammering this point home. Perpetrators can be family members or paid caregivers. Senior citizens are often run into issues with hoarding. Hoarding we talked about in terms of child neglect. It's the same thing, of course, with our seniors. Hoarding doesn't just mean a messy house or a cluttered or dirty house. It means the home is so filled with useless or needless items that rooms in the home cannot be used for their intended purpose. You can't really live in the living room. You can't bathe or use the toilet in the bathroom. You can't cook in the kitchen. You can't safely sleep in the bedroom. That's hoarding. And senior citizens who can't keep track of things like garbage and recycling and throwing things out, and who also often have mental health issues, frequently have problems with hoarding. Having to live in an unsafe facility. This, of course, would include rehabilitation centers and nursing homes that are unsafe. They're not clean. They have, broken ceiling tiles, cracks in the floor, dangerous steps, windows that won't open, not safe clearances to exit and enter rooms and buildings. Those are all unsafe facility issues, which meet the substandard living conditions criteria. Not having heat or working plumbing, and just chronic serious maintenance issues are all examples of elders being forced to live in substandard living conditions. And if we have elders living this way, it may mean a family member or a paid caregiver is responsible for this occurring. Financial exploitation. We talked about financial control in terms of domestic violence. You'll remember we talked about an abusive partner, not giving the other partner any access to money or restricting their budget in the most ridiculous ways, making them account for every penny. Well, financial exploitation is much different when we're talking about elder abuse. So, how much money and other assets do you think are stolen from senior citizens? I want you to take a guess of what the amount is in total every year. It's over 3 billion every year. Some estimates I looked up had the number as high as $39 billion every year. Every year. We know the low number is 3 billion. And of course, it's hard to come up with an exact number because so much financial exploitation committed against seniors is never reported. But the estimates are over $3 billion worth of money and assets are stolen every year, and estimates go up to $39 billion a year. And of course, perpetrators can be family members and paid caregivers, but we're adding a new category for financial exploitation, and that is strangers. This is where strangers come into abusing senior citizens. So, how specifically are seniors exploited financially? Well, one is obviously theft, people simply stealing from them, taking their money, taking their credit cards, taking items that belong to them, jewelry or other items, just outright theft. Overcharging seniors is a way to financially exploit seniors. So people who do work on an elderly person's home, if a job would normally cost $5,000, they charge them $10,000, knowing that the senior citizen probably isn't going to, jump on the internet and start comparing rates and prices and have better sense of what things should cost. So overcharging seniors for services. Power of attorney, misuse of authority. This is also about misuse of what we call fiduciary duties. So in a power of attorney, what will happen is, and anyone can get a power of attorney at any age, what it says is if I should become impaired or I'm unable to care for myself or I became unable to make financial decisions by myself and for myself, I'm giving that authority to another person. So people often will give one of their adult children a power of attorney and say, when I'm unable to keep track of my checking account, to make sure my mortgage gets paid, to make sure my taxes are getting taken care of, when I reach a point where I mentally can't do that stuff anymore, I'm going to give my adult child or another person I trust the authority to manage my financial affairs. Well, too often what happens with senior citizens is someone who has no respect or regard for the senior convinces the senior to give them a power of attorney. And then what they do is they go around exploiting that authority. They access their bank account, they can clean out their bank account, they can access their mortgage, the deed to their home, they can access all kinds of financial information, including credit cards and savings accounts, and then they just exploit it for their own personal use. So that's abusing or misusing authority with powers of attorney. Forging signatures, that's a real obvious one with seniors. People just steal a book of their checks and forge their signature and cash checks all over town. And then we have all kinds of financial scams that are perpetrated against seniors by strangers. Phone and mail fraud is huge here. So we've all had this, right? You have a cell phone, your cell phone rings, it's a number you don't recognize. For whatever reason, we pick it up and it's a person telling us, we're calling from the United States Treasury and you're about to get arrested because you haven't paid your taxes and you're going to go to jail. And they go on and it's pretty scary and intimidating. And then ultimately what it leads to is saying, well, you can pay right now, but you have to give us your credit card over the phone. And of course, it's a big, huge scam and it's just a way to rip people off. And seniors are especially susceptible to this kind of stuff. Remember, baby boomers and members of the silent generation did not grow up with computers. They did not grow up with cell phones. They don't have any easy way to look up what's the current scam or to access websites that tell them about different scams. They also don't get a lot of warnings, not nearly enough, about not providing their personal information over the phone. Contractor scams are a huge one against seniors. Someone shows up at an elderly person's house and says, "Oh, ma'am, your driveway's a mess. Look out, this is just hazardous. You could get hurt out here and your property value is going to go down. You really need to let me get this fixed for you." And they tell the person it's going to cost you $12,000. It's going to be beautiful. It'll last for years. So the senior hands over this person $12,000. And what they do is essentially use a black substance to paint the driveway so it looks dark and it looks like something's been done to it, when in fact they haven't done anything at all. A lot of contractors scam elders by overcharging, and they say, "Oh, your windows need to be replaced." And the going rate for the window replacement is $4,000, but they charge the senior $14,000. It's just all those kinds of scams. Another financial scam people use against seniors is they obtain their social security number, their driver's license, or their credit card info and then use it for their own personal use. We also have the grandparent scam. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this. This is especially creepy to me. Someone will figure out a elderly person's family member, their names of their family members. For example, they'll go on Facebook, they'll find somebody who's in their 40s or 50s, and they'll identify the grandparents and the grandkids just by looking through their friends and their photographs and their tags. And then what they do is they call the senior person and they say, "Grandma, it's me, it's Jeremy, and I'm in big trouble and I need your help and I need you to give me your credit card or I need you to send money to such and such place." And they convince the elderly person that they're actually a relative, usually a grandchild who's in trouble, and they convince the elderly person to give up credit card information over the phone. And this is again, grandparents aren't as familiar as the younger generations about social media and about the internet and how easy it is to access people's personal information. So a senior, especially one who has dementia or mental health issues, is not going to understand that that's not really their grandkid. And they're going to be especially confused when the grandkid says, "Oh, do you remember last week at the birthday party when we were all together?" And of course, they know about all this stuff from social media. So that's a particularly disturbing scam, commonly referred to as the grandparent scam. And another one, which goes along with power of attorney and misusing fiduciary duty, is wrongfully influencing a last will and testament. So this would be a family member or a paid caregiver getting a elderly person to leave them things they're not entitled to in their will. There's been many cases of financial exploitation where someone who's a paid in-home caregiver is taking care of a senior whose adult children are located out of state all across the country, don't see the elderly person often, and they convince the elderly person to leave them everything they own in their will. And this doesn't come to light until the elderly person passes away. And then when the executor of the will is going through all the assets, they leave that the paid home health care worker has been left the house, the cars, and all of the money. So those were the types of blatant elder abuse. Now we're going to move into two serious problems that are going on with our elders that are just serious in regards to their own care, but also make them more vulnerable to different types of abuse. One of them is alcoholism. The rate of alcoholism amongst our seniors is staggering. Senior citizens in this country have very high rates of binge drinking and heavy drinking. Binge drinking is defined by those who research this sort of thing as having 4 to 5 alcoholic drinks in a 2-hour period. That's pretty quick drinking, right? 4 to 5 alcoholic beverages in just 2-hour period is defined as binge drinking. And heavy drinking is doing that binge drinking 5 or more days a month. And I saw different statistics on the rates and estimates of binge drinking and heavy drinking amongst seniors, and they varied enough where I didn't want to put any statistics here. But regardless of which study you look at, the problem is severe. So why are our seniors abusing alcohol to this extent? Well, for the same reasons anybody abuses alcohol: loneliness, boredom, depression. It's also self-medicating. So a senior citizen may have an awful lot of aches and pains and physical problems, and getting good and drunk kind of relieves those symptoms and makes you feel better for a little while. Of course, it doesn't help very long, but for a couple hours, it makes people feel better. And of course, that behavior becomes addictive. So a senior may decide, well, I'm only going to have 3 drinks tonight, but tomorrow I won't have any. And the next night they're bored or they're lonely or they're depressed or they don't feel well. And they say, well, I'm only going to have 3 drinks tonight. And of course, then it becomes a habit. Alcohol abuse is especially concerning for seniors. It's not good for anyone to abuse alcohol, teenagers, midlifers, or anyone else. But it's especially dangerous for senior citizens, and there's a couple reasons for this. One is that older people have less body mass. They're not as big as the rest of us, right? Most elderly people, even those who were a little heavier during most of their life, as senior citizens often become very thin and very frail. And when you have less body mass, alcohol has a much stronger effect on you. Alcohol also remains in seniors' bodies for a longer period of time. Alcohol abuse by seniors can have adverse reactions to the numerous medications most of them are on. And it can have two interactions that are really concerning. One is that it will make a medication not work at all for the period of time you're abusing alcohol. So that may lead to a senior taking more and more medication, trying to get the effects of medication. Or, of course, we know that it can have the opposite effect, and it can increase all the side effects of a medication. So it can make medication ineffective, or it can make it overly effective, and that, of course, can lead to overdose. It increases problems associated with depression and dementia. A lot of us forget that alcohol is classified as a depressant. So oftentimes people who are depressed say, well, I drink because it makes me feel better. It makes me feel happier. Well, it may in that hour that you're drinking, but alcohol is a depressant. So if you're already lonely or sad or feeling abandoned and you drink, it's just going to make you feel worse. And of course, a lot of our elders have dementia and memory problems, and alcohol is going to compound that in ways that can make elderly people hallucinate. It can be extremely frightening. No good. Alcohol use also causes dehydration. We all know that, right? Any of us who's ever had too much to drink and the next morning you wake up and you feel like a tumbleweed in the desert because alcohol is dehydrating. Well, this can be dangerous when you're a senior citizen. And it also worsens the symptoms of many medical problems senior has, such as diabetes and high blood pressure. So alcohol abuse is no good for anyone, but it's especially dangerous for senior citizens. Likewise, drug addiction is an increasingly difficult problem amongst our senior population. 40% of senior citizens take 5 or more prescribed drugs every day. That is a lot of medication. 40% of them take 5 or more prescribed drugs. That means 40% of seniors could be prescribed 8 or 12 or 14 or 15 or more drugs that they now have in their house. I worked as a volunteer EMT for many years, and I can tell you that I saw this issue firsthand where the ambulance would be called to a senior's house, and in the, routine questioning about their medical history, you'd ask them, how many medications do you take and what medications do you take? And I can't tell you how many times a senior citizen literally handed me a shoebox full of medication. And oftentimes they had loose pills. Almost all EMTs and paramedics have an app on their phone that they can take a photo of a pill and identify it. This is because so many seniors have boxes full of unmarked or mislabeled pills, or they just start putting their pills in baggies or other containers. So they get very easily confused about what they're supposed to take, when they're supposed to take, and they often are not very good at tracking outdated or expired medication, so they tend to hang on to it. So you can go into a senior's house. It's not uncommon to find 20, 30 or more bottles of prescription medication. And of course, the opiate crisis has hit our senior population just like it's hit the rest of our population. So a lot of the prescribed drugs for seniors are opiates. And abusing opiates has a lot of serious adverse effects, of course, including death. They can kill you. Abusing opiates and alcohol is frequently fatal. And of course, our seniors can get easily confused and take too much prescription medication, increasing the rate of addiction. And there are seniors who intentionally overuse prescription drugs for the same reason they abuse alcohol. They do it to try to make themselves feel better. So as the opiate crisis got more and more overwhelming for the government to deal with, a lot of states, including New York, instituted programs that prevent doctor shopping. So doctor shopping is the term for when you go to a doctor and you get them to write you a prescription for painkillers, but they'll only give you 10 a month. So then you go to a different doctor and you get them to give you a prescription, and then another doctor and another doctor. And you just go till you have 10, 20 or more prescriptions you can fill for the drug you want. That's called doctor shopping. So when the opiate problem really became a crisis, New York State and others instituted laws that prevent doctor shopping. It tracks those prescriptions, which is why now to pick those prescriptions up, you have to show a driver's license to indicate who you are. So they can track it. So if you were doing that kind of thing, or if a senior was doing that kind of thing, doctor shopping, getting all these prescriptions for opioids, well, that doesn't work anymore in New York State. If you have too many prescriptions, it's electronically tracked. And the pharmacy will say, I'm sorry, but you already filled this prescription from Dr. Jones, so I cannot fill this prescription that you have from Dr. Williams. And it keeps track of it. So that's a good thing, right? That helps prevent opiate prescription abuse. The problem is kind of an unforeseen effect of that. When you're addicted to opioids, it is an incredibly powerful addiction, And if you can't get the pills you want, you're going to find street level drugs that will work in the same way. And we now have an epidemic of senior citizens using street drugs, including heroin, to try to get the same effect from the pills they can't obtain from the pharmacy. So I just think about that. It just confounds the mind thinking of a 75-year-old, 80-year-old person who has no street smarts out in a city trying to find heroin or prescription opiates. So street drugs are dangerous for everybody, but they're even more so for seniors who are exposed to further abuse and exploitation in trying to use illegal drugs. It's really astounding. I mean, abuse of street drugs by elderly people was almost unheard of. It was extremely rare before the opiate crisis. You didn't hear a lot of stories about a grandma who was using meth that she got from a meth lab. But now it's not uncommon to hear about seniors abusing street drugs. So what do we do about all this? What do we do about all these issues with senior abuse? So you're going to look at two different websites in the media items this week. That one is the federal response to elder abuse. One is the New York State level response to elder abuse. And there's a lot of different agencies at the federal, state, and local level that help elders. For example, New York State has the New York State Office for the Aging. Closer to home, in New York State, there is an Adult Protective Services unit within every single county across New York State. It's almost always located within DSS, the Department of Social Services. So while we talked about Child Protective Services, CPS, Adult Protective Services, the acronym is APS. And Adult Protective Services can offer senior citizens a lot of services. They can help them obtain mental health treatment. They can advocate for them. They can be that person who helps them not get taken in by scams and overcharging. They can assist elders in housing, either obtaining housing, getting repairs done, making sure their housing is safe and appropriate for them. They can help find them home assistance, whether it be nursing care, nutrition care, people who just help you keep your house clean and neat. They can help with all types of assistance in the home. They have a lot of access to helping seniors finding medical care, whether that be anything from surgery to eyeglasses to dentistry to mental health treatment. They're really good at helping elders with financial issues. They have paid and volunteer people who work for Adult Protective Services who will do a senior citizen's taxes for them for very low cost or for free. They will help them sort out their checking account and their savings account and their Social Security and their retirement benefits. And they're really good at spotting when a senior is being financially exploited. And of course, they can offer crisis intervention services for when an elder is in crisis and in need of immediate help. And just important to note that Adult Protective Services doesn't just help senior citizens, they help all adults. So if you are 18 or older, or you know someone who's 18 or older, they can provide all of these services or help you find the services you need. So Adult Protective Services for all adults, but an awful lot of the work they do is for the senior citizens. So this is just the Albany County Adult Protective Services webpage. You can see on the screen that it explains it's for people 18 or older, physical or mental impairment. It helps people protect themselves from neglect, abuse, or hazardous situations. It helps people who are unable to provide for their most basic needs for food, clothing, shelter, and medical care. And it helps adults who have no one who's willing or able to assist them. So there's a whole bunch of information about adult services in Albany County on their website. And since we have Adult Protective Services in every county, here's Rensselaer County's webpage. They call it Protective Services for Adult, PSA. It's the same thing. And they describe the criteria of someone 18 years old who has unmet needs and who has no one else who's willing or able to care for them. So these are good resources if you know an adult, whether they be over 18 or over age 60. These are really good resources. And like I said, there's an adult protective services unit in every county of the state. However, here's the warning. It's not easy to get a senior to accept help. If you have a grandparent, if you have an elderly person in your life, you already know this. Our elderly citizens, regardless of whatever physical or mental health issues they may be dealing with, can also be incredibly stubborn and strong-willed. And even when they know they need help, it can often be extremely difficult for a senior citizen to accept help. I mean, really, who among us loves accepting help, right? And it's just as hard for our seniors. So it's really difficult legally to force help upon our seniors. Every adult in the United States has certain rights once they reach the age of 18 or 21. The government has a lot more power and authority to impose services on children and adults who have children, right? That's a lot easier. However, if you are over 21 in this country, you have certain rights. You have certain rights to live the way you want to. And as long as you're not outright presenting a danger to yourself or to someone else, there's a lot of protections in the law for letting people over 21 live the way they want to live. So oftentimes seniors, when they're approached by adult protective services and say someone called on your behalf, they're worried about you, they're concerned about you. What do you think what's the biggest fear seniors have? They think they're going to get hauled out of their house. So they've maintained this home for their whole lives. They worked hard for many years to pay for this home and everything in it. And as soon as they see a county worker at the door, their first thought, their biggest fear is going to be, they're going to force me out of my house and they're going to force me into a nursing home. And we understand that, right? We understand why seniors have that fear. But what seniors don't know is it is incredibly difficult to force a senior citizen into a nursing home against their will. If they are not presenting an imminent danger to themselves or to another person, it is a very lengthy and complex legal process to have someone declared incompetent. It's called an Article 81 proceeding in New York. And if I showed you the packet of information to learn about Article 81s, it's about an inch thick. It is an incredibly complex process. And it's not because the government doesn't want to help seniors. It's because seniors have inalienable rights, as do all other adults. So if they want to live in a home that smells terrible, if they want to have inadequate clothing, if they want to eat the minimal amount of food and eat the same food every day, there's very little the government or family members can do about it. And it's it's good and it's bad, right? We want seniors to feel like adults. No adult likes being treated like a helpless baby, right? And our senior citizens are no exceptions. However, it does make it very difficult to help a senior citizen in need. The textbook covers 5 theories of elder abuse. I'm just going to go over this quickly because it's going to look really familiar. These same theories were involved when we talked about domestic violence and intimate partner violence, right? So intergenerational transmission of violence theory is our cycle of violence. It's the theory that people who are abused as children and adults will go on to abuse the senior citizens in their life, whether they're paid caretakers for them or it's their own family members. The theory of psychopathology is that people who abuse elders have a mental disorder that causes them to be violent. Same theory we heard about in domestic violence. as is the social exchange theory. This is the idea that elders can become helpless and entirely dependent on a caregiver. And if a caregiver has complete 100% authority and power over an elder, it is likely they will misuse that power and abuse or neglect the vulnerable elder. Family stress theory. This one is a really important one to remember. And it's the most widely accepted theory that explains elder abuse. And it's that caring for an elderly person can be extremely stressful and difficult. An elder with dementia, other mental health problems, or serious medical issues are even more difficult to take care of. There can be huge financial burdens, which can become overwhelming. And all of this stress can lead a caregiver to abuse an elder. Now, I don't in any way mean to suggest that it excuses someone from abusing an elder. There's no excuse. There's no reason to abuse an elder. But when we try to think about why this happens so we can work on how to prevent it, it's good to know that this is the most widely accepted theory because it makes us wonder, how can we reduce stress for caregivers? And that could be in a family member who's caring for an elderly person. It also means, how do we reduce the stress of the nurses and the home health aides and the licensed practical nurses who care for our elders in their home and in facilities? In neutralization theory, not entirely sure why the textbook included this. This is really more relevant to juvenile delinquency, but it's included in our textbook because neutralization theory can be related to elder abuse. But more than explaining why people abuse elders, it describes abusers' conduct. And neutralization theory says that people who abuse elders will refuse to accept responsibility. They will deny the abuse or neglect is occurring. They'll blame family members. They'll blame nurses or doctors or home health care aides for the abuse that they in fact caused. So that's neutralization theory. This is our last item for the day. I call this the shame of New York State. That's my opinion. New York State is the only state in the United States that does not have mandated reporting of elder abuse. We talked about mandated reporting of child abuse, and we've had that since 1974. But there's no mandated reporting of elder abuse. And this is why it's important. Consider just these two examples. You have an in-home caretaker, say a home health aide, who's in the home all the time, hours every day, day after day, and they see a family member physically abusing the senior citizen. There's no law that requires them to report that abuse. They're not required to report it to Adult Protective Services. They're not required to report it to the police. And bankers and other financial people are not required to report suspicious financial activity and the draining of seniors' accounts. So if a bank teller in a small town who's aided that senior for many years over their transactions suddenly sees a stranger coming in with signed checks and other financial documents and a power of attorney that they find to be suspicious, they are not required to call Adult Protective Services or the police. And because there's no mandated reporting, it can almost make it impossible for people to report. For example, if a doctor thinks a senior citizen is being physically abused, they may be prevented from calling the police because of HIPAA, right? HIPAA prevents us from releasing medical information, so it may put a home healthcare worker or any other medical provider in a very difficult situation because the law does not support them making reports about seniors. I have my theories about why we still do not have mandated reporting of elder abuse in New York, but it's really a matter of opinion. And in fact, it's going to be your opinion that matters in the discussion board this week. So that's it. That's the end of the Module 12 lecture. But as always, you still have other stuff you need to do. Our textbook is back. We haven't used the textbook for the past 3 modules, but we are using it this week. So pages 131 to 151 are assigned in the textbook, and it's all elder abuse material. There's 2 websites I want you to look at, and I want you to do more than just open the front page and look at the opening page. I really want you to click around, open some stuff, really see what's on there. The first is the Federal Department of Justice website related to elder abuse. The second is the New York State Attorney General's website about elder abuse. And the New York State Attorney General's website and the federal website has a lot of information about physical abuse and other types of abuse, but they're really good at teaching seniors about financial abuse, financial scams, all that trickery we talked about earlier. You're going to have a quiz this week. It'll open Friday, November 20th at 8 a.m. and you have to have it submitted by Monday, November 23rd at 11:59. This is quiz 7 and we only have 8 quizzes. So after this, you will only have one more quiz. Discussion board this week, extra credit. It's going to be asking for your opinion about why we don't have mandated reporting. And you'll be happy to see there's no project this week. If you have any questions, concerns, issues, anything you'd like to discuss, please send me an email.